Hello, my name is Jason Demore, and welcome back to By Faith Bible Studies. Wasn't that really awesome to hear Cash speak the word last week on Ecclesiastes 9 1 through 12? One of my favorite passages in Ecclesiastes, and super awesome to hear a new voice on here speaking it. I've been really encouraged to hear both Brad and now Cash, younger people. Well, I'm also a younger person, but people who are even younger than me who I have been able to mentor in a sense and befriend speaking the word and speaking the truth. An awesome encouragement. And honestly, he really nailed it. Looking at how to approach death but still live life, and this idea of it is better to live than to be dead because we have life to enjoy because it is a gift from God. Really, another lesson about living humbly. And living humbly and wisely means to live and be alive and enjoy the gifts that God has given us. And I also loved how he made that great connection to the gospel and connecting this idea to live is Christ and to die is gain. That yes, we know that death leads to eternity with him, but still we live here because that is for his gain and for his glory. And so this week we are going to continue our journey of learning how to be humbly wise. Really continuing that. We've been doing that from about chapter 7, looking at how to live humbly and to live wisely. And Ecclesiastes 9:13 through 10:20 is going to continue that trend. Now, 9:13 through 10:20 is a very odd passage, and I still haven't fully figured out how it fits into Ecclesiastes. It sticks with the theme of living humbly and living wisely, and it continues that theme. However, from a more logistical or syntactical basis, it doesn't really fit in. It jumps into a whole bunch of proverbial statements, much like the book of Proverbs. And yes, there have been some proverbs in the book of Ecclesiastes, but not to this extent. And so it's an odd place for there just to be a ton of proverbial statements that seem to not really fit together at first glance. Ecclesiastes has been more full of poetry or prose and this more stream of consciousness, almost language. But here we have these proverbial statements. And I haven't fully figured out why they're here, but one of my beliefs that they're here is to understand that Proverbs came first. And so, in a sense, Ecclesiastes here in this chapter, Solomon is referencing his own work. And I think that's a way of understanding it. So keep that in the back of your mind as we read this passage, because it really does seem like we're in the book of Proverbs. And what is often happens with the book of Proverbs is there are a whole bunch of proverbs that are sitting next to each other that really just don't connect. This is not that case. There is a common theme, or at least I feel that there is a common theme connecting these wisdom statements. And so as I read this, I want you to ask that question. What is the common theme connecting these wisdom statements, these proverbs? And how is this different than the book of Proverbs itself? Let me read Ecclesiastes 9, verse 13 through 10:20. Also this I came to see as wisdom under the sun, and it impressed me. There was a small city with few men in it, and a great king came to it, surrounded it, and constructed large siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he delivered the city by his wisdom. Yet no one remembered that poor man. So I said, wisdom is better than strength. But the wisdom of the poor man is despised, and his words are not heeded. The words of the wise heard in quietness are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. Dead flies make a perfumer's oil stink, so a little foolishness is weightier than wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart directs him towards the right, but the foolish man's heart directs him towards the left. Even when the fool walks along the road, his sense is lacking, and he demonstrates to everyone that he is a fool. If the ruler's temper rises against you, do not abandon your position, because composure allays great offenses. There is an evil I have seen under the sun, like an arrow which goes forth from the ruler. Folly is set in many exalted places, while rich men sit in humble places. I have seen slaves riding on horses, and princes walking like slaves on the land. He who digs a pit may fall into it, and a serpent may bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stones may be hurt by them, and he who splits logs may be endangered by them. If the axe is dull and he does not sharpen its edge, then he must exert more strength. Wisdom has the advantage of giving success. If the serpent bites before being charmed, there is no profit for the charmer. Words from the mouth of a wise man are gracious, while the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of his talking is folly, and the end of it is wicked madness. Yet the fool multiplies words. No man knows what will happen, and who can tell him what will come after him? The toil of a fool so wearies him that he does not even know how to go into a city. Woe to you, O land, whose king is a lad, and whose princes feast in the morning. Blessed are you, O land, whose king is of nobility, and whose princes eat at the appropriate time, for strength and not for drunkenness. Through indolence the rafters sag, and through slackness the house leaks. Men prepare a meal for enjoyment, and wine makes life merry, and money is the answer to everything. Furthermore, in your bedchamber do not curse a king, and in your sleeping rooms do not curse a rich man. For a bird of the heavens will carry the sound, and the winged creature will make the matter known. What a long, lengthy, and confusing at times passage. Let's pray over this time. Dear Lord, I pray that you would give me wisdom as we address this passage, Lord, and you would give me the strength to really preach this word, not by my power, but by your power through me, and that I may learn something new from the book of Ecclesiastes. Because that is really all there is to life, is to learn more about you, to glorify you, to obey you, and live for you. Amen. What a strange passage that we have just read. Before I really jump into the passage, I want to jump back to what I said earlier about the book of Proverbs, because I do honestly believe that this is, in a sense, an homage to book of Proverbs. Ecclesiastes 10:3, which I just read a moment ago, I'm going to read it one more time, reads this: Even when the fool walks along the road, his sense is lacking, and he demonstrates to everyone that he is a fool. Tell me this doesn't sound just like Proverbs 13:6. Every prudent man dealeth knowledge, but a fool layeth open his folly. Similarly, he tells everyone he is a fool. Ecclesiastes 10:4, the very next verse, is the same thing. If the ruler's temper rises against you, do not abandon your position, because composure allays great offenses. And Proverbs 25:15, through patience a ruler can be persuaded, and a gentle tongue can break a bone. The way to deal with rulers is to have a good composure and patience, and that will persuade them. Very similar passages. And jumping down to Ecclesiastes 10:12, a third example, words from the mouth of a wise man are gracious, while the lips of a fool consume him. Proverbs 18:7, a fool's mouth is his ruin, and his lips are a snare to his soul. The fool is consumed by his own words, or the fool's words are a snare to his soul. These verses here are very similar to some proverbs that are in the book of Proverbs that are also written by Solomon. And so I do think that part of this passage, part of it being here, is an homage to Proverbs. But there's a twist. And the twist is this, is that the book of Proverbs, if you ever spent even a little time in the book of Proverbs, it's all about go wisdom, wisdom is good, wisdom always wins. And foolishness is evil, and the foolish man always destroys himself, and terror always comes to the fool. Do not be a fool, or you will be destroyed. Be wise, and you will have riches upon riches upon riches. And here, I feel that this passage almost serves as a counter to that, because it is the usual wise man and foolish man comparison, except that the foolish man seems to keep winning. He seems to keep being a noble. He seems to keep being that slave who is riding on a horse in nobility. He seems to still be winning. And it's a theme that we've been addressing throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, this idea that we live in a fallen world, and so that wisdom does not always lead to glory. In fact, it rarely does. But rather, it seems like the foolish man keeps on winning. And so as we look at this passage, I want you to think about that it really is an homage to Proverbs in this sense, but there's a twist. And that twist is addressing the reality that we live in a fallen world. And so I'm going to address this passage in 4 points about wisdom. 4 points about wisdom and the glories of wisdom. And then as I'm going through those points, I will address the flaws with wisdom when we live in a fallen world. And I hope through this we'll have an even better understanding of what wisdom is. Verses 9:13 through 18 of chapter 9. Wisdom is strong. Let me read just a little bit of what we read earlier. Also this I came to see as wisdom under the sun, and it impressed me. There was a small city with few men in it, and a great king came to it, surrounded it, and constructed large siege works against it. But there was found in a poor wise man, and he delivered the city by his wisdom. Jumping to 16. So I said, wisdom is better than strength. What we see in this story is the story of a hero. A small little city is being attacked by a king, and the king has siege works all around, and he's going to destroy the city, and he's stronger than the city. He outnumbers them in every sense of the word. But this poor, wise man who really has no status at all, somehow, it's not explained how, saves the city. And so now, obviously, the next response is to raise him on a pedestal and glory in him. Put him as their king. He obviously is the one who should be king. This wise man should no longer be poor. Rather, he should be given riches upon riches upon riches, for he deserves them. Look at this. He saved this kingdom, and it shows that, yes, wisdom is better than strength. Wisdom is strong. Wisdom is what leads to the epic battle victories of life. With the wise man thwarting the enemy. It's an image of the powers of wisdom that should lead to glory and honor for the wise man. But rather we read words such as forgotten, despised, not heard. The wise man is not remembered. The wise man's words are not heeded. No matter how much good he does, even if wisdom is better than weapons of war, wisdom is forgotten. And so here we have our first juxtaposition. Wisdom is strong, but wisdom is forgotten. Wisdom is forgotten. The wisdom of the poor man is despised, and his words are not heeded. Now, why is wisdom ignored? Why? Well, the reason is clear in verse 18. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. And if we know anything about sin, it's that sin controls the heart of the sinner, and that a sinner is enslaved to sin. And so, of course, wisdom is forgotten. Of course, wisdom is ignored. Of course, the foolish man is put on a pedestal. And so from this, the wise man has this response, as we see in verse 17. The words of the wise heard in quietness. The wise man who knows his words are strong, he knows his words win the battle at the end of the day, are heard in quietness, are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. The wise man is quiet. The wise man is gentle. The wise man knows that his strength will be forgotten. Wisdom is strong, but forgotten. How harsh that is to hear, but how real it is. When you look at the book of Proverbs, you'll see many calls to be strong. And the same writer of Proverbs says here that yes, that is true, and he gives an image of that. But he also says that that strength is tempered by the reality that we live in a fallen world, and no one wants that strength, because that strength comes from God, and that strength means reliance on God. And who wants to be reliant on God? They would rather be that one sinner who destroys much good. But that one sinner who destroys much good will be destroyed by God, the God who is eternally wise and judges with wisdom, and the strength of his hand supports his wise men, and the strength of his hand will destroy the foolish. Wisdom is strong. Cling to wisdom, but wisdom is forgotten. Know that your wisdom will not be known. And the wise man should be okay with that. They should be okay with knowing that they will be forgotten because they know God is greater and that at the end of times his name eternally will be known and every knee will bow to the great God who is stronger than any wise man ever was. Wisdom is strong but forgotten. And this leads us into chapter 10 with this emphasis of the sinner. And now we have this connection between sinner and foolish one. And we know that the foolish one is the sinner who destroys much good. And it leads us to verses 1 through 7 of chapter 10. Wisdom is right. Wisdom is right. It says here in verse 2, a wise man's heart directs him towards the right, but the foolish man's heart directs him towards the left. This idea that the wise man knows what is good and knows what is righteous and goes towards that. When it says the foolish man goes towards the left, you could replace that word with he goes in the wrong direction, or he sins, or he does evil. But the wise man is righteous and he does what is right. It also says here in verse 1 that he is full of wisdom and honor. However, this verse does show us that the wise man is right and honorable, but the foolish man is so corruptive. Read verse 1. Dead flies make a perfumer's oil stink. The perfumer's oil is the chief of this wise man depicted here, but just one dead fly ruins the entire vial of oil. It is ruined by a little corruption of foolishness, because wisdom is easily corrupted by foolishness. And it leads us to see that yes, wisdom is right, but wisdom is forsaken. Wisdom is forsaken because foolishness is so corruptive. But we do have a reminder here in verse 3 of the foolishness of the fool. Even when the fool walks along the road, his sense is lacking, and he demonstrates to everyone that he is a fool. If the ruler's temper rises against you, a foolish ruler, do not abandon your position, because composure allays great offenses. What this shows us is two things. First of all, that the foolish man is foolish, and that the foolish man somehow is able to be in a ruling position. But then it secondly repeats this theme of the wise man is complacent, he has good composure, he is quiet, and he endures the temper of the ones who are above him. Because the wise man understands that wisdom is forsaken. He understands that for some reason in a fallen world, the fool is put on a pedestal and the wise man is forgotten. And here in verses 5 through 6, we have a symbol of that. Verses 5 through 6 show this idea of a slave, or in other words, a foolish man on a horse. And the rich man sits in humble places, and the rich man walks. The prince walks while the slave is on his horse. And it doesn't make sense. And it even says in verse 5, there is an evil I have seen of the sun, like an error which goes forth from the ruler. It's not right. And when it says slave and prince, it's not talking about slavery or anything. It's talking about status and class, and comparing that to foolishness and wisdom. That if class system was right, then you would think that the wise man would be in a higher class than the foolish man. But here we have a picture of the exact opposite. That the foolish man rides the horse like a prince, and the wise man walks the dirty roads like a slave. It's not right. It is an evil and an error, and the reason that it's like this is because no matter how right wisdom is forsaken. No one wants wisdom. They listen too quickly to the corruption of the foolish one, and the corruption of the fool has so much power because we live in a fallen world. But regardless, remember, wisdom is strong, and wisdom is right. And we should cleave to wisdom, and we should want wisdom, and we should know that yes, wisdom may lead to us walking like slaves along the road, forgotten, forsaken, but still we should cleave to wisdom, and we should want wisdom. We should want wisdom. It doesn't make sense. Let's continue. Verses 8 through 15 teach us that wisdom is successful. Wisdom is successful. Now, I use this word really to talk about the temporal world. I think that the next verses 8 through 15, talk really about earth and work and words. And so I'm going to split it into those two sections. So these are two subpoints of my point. Wisdom is successful. The first is that wisdom is successful in works, and that wisdom is successful in words. Verses 8 through 10 show us that wisdom is successful in works. And once again, I'm going to jump really right in there. We're going to go to verse 10, skipping 8 and 9. You'll see why in just a moment. Let me read it. If the axe, verse 10, is dull and he does not sharpen its edge, then he must exert more strength. Wisdom has the advantage of giving success. This is where I get that word, success. Now, this is a really obvious parable. I mean, if you want to cut down a tree, you should sharpen the axe so that you can cut down the tree easier. But that word advantage has so much power there, because how many times we read in Ecclesiastes, what advantage is man in all of his toils? Where there is wisdom, wisdom is that advantage. Wisdom gives that success. Wisdom gives that power. Wisdom allows you to do good in work. Wisdom allows you to work harder than any fool could ever work, as they work with their dull axe, desperately trying to cut down a tree that the wise man metaphorically can cut down in one swing. The wise man is smart. The wise man is successful. The wise man knows what he is doing. He sharpens his axe. He does well. He is a good worker. But that's verse 10. So what's going on with verses 8 and verse 9? Verses 8 and verse 9, the way that I interpret it, and there's different interpretations of these verses, is the reality of the nature of life and work especially. This idea that if you dig a pit, and your job is literally to dig a pit, because these could be jobs in that world, you may fall into it. Now, that's a reality. If you're a foolish man, you'll probably fall into it faster. But if you're a wise man, you too may fall into the pit. And if you are a demolitions expert and you break through a wall and you're doing that work, a serpent who is living in that wall may bite you. You may be a foolish person or you may be a wise person. The randomness of life can cause that to happen. And he who quarries stone, a stone may fall on you and you may be hurt, be it that you're wise or a fool. And if your job is to cut down a tree with that axe, no matter how sharp your axe is, the tree may still fall on you and kill you and bring you into the face of the judgment of God. Crazy things happen to all people because we live in this world. I really think that that's what it's saying. It's just like, these things happen. No matter how hard you work or how lazy you work, things happen. And I think the point there is twofold. First of all, it's a reassurance that things will happen to fools because of their foolishness and because they are lazy and they don't work diligently and wisely. They will fall quicker into pits and be bitten by snakes faster. But on the other hand, it is a reality that in a fallen world, no matter how smart you are, how good you are at your job, you could be destroyed in a moment, and you could be bitten by the serpents of life like that. Instantly destroyed. Because we live in a fallen world. Work is faulty, and the success of wisdom is faulty. It does not always work. Working hard does not always lead to good work. Because we live in a faulty world. Work has been ruined by the fall. And for the wise man and for the rich man, things happen. And the tree may fall upon you. In a fallen world, the serpent can still bite, and the stones can still fall, no matter how smart you work. But the wise man, most of the time, is successful. You just have to understand that there's that struggle in a fallen world, that nothing is perfect. We see this same idea in the idea of words in 11 through 14. Verse 11, I want to stop there for a moment because it's a little confusing. It says, if the serpent bites before being charmed, there is no profit for the charmer. Now, that word charmer is sometimes interpreted babbler, and I think that's the better word because somebody who speaks or babbles is the one who can charm that snake. The snake comes out of the little pot, and then they sing their little song, and the snake goes back into its pot, right? But if you do that wrong, or you don't do it well enough, or the serpent comes out and bites you before you're able to charm the snake, then you failed. And then by using that particular word that also translates into babbler, we have this statement about too much talking. That if you don't use your words correctly, they will destroy you. And this connects with verse 12. Words from the mouth of a wise man are gracious, while the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of his talking is folly, and the end of it is wicked madness. Yet the fool multiplies words. The foolish man has no control over his words. He talks too much, and those words destroy him. He is not successful with his words, but the wise man is by being gracious. He is able to control his words and be successful in life. He speaks little and graciously, and he has much power. This reminds me of James, where he talks extensively about the tongue and how much power the tongue has, and that the Christian, the wise man, should control his tongue, knowing that with the tongue we can curse man and bless God. That doesn't make sense. Let us control our tongues, because the tongue can cause such a great forest fire. Control our tongues, and the wise man is successful with his tongue. But the verse does not end there. It adds that statement that we hear so often in Ecclesiastes. No man knows what will happen, and who can tell him what will come after him? Because the wisdom of the wise man is not perfectly successful, and it does not the answer that everyone's looking for. Of what is life? These questions of what will happen after us, these questions that we keep asking, the wise man does not know, no matter how many words he speaks or how few words he speaks. His wisdom is still faulty. Wisdom is successful, but it's faulty. But still cleave to wisdom, because wisdom is strong, wisdom is right, and wisdom is successful. But it is also forgotten, forsaken, and faulty because we live in a fallen world. And it's hard. And it still doesn't really make any sense. But let's continue in our study of wisdom. And let me tell you, it only gets stranger and more confusing. And the text is honestly even more hard to read. But actually, my apologies. Before we go into our next section, there's a verse here in verse 15 that really gives a lot of hope and a lot of reason why we should hold on to wisdom. The toil of a fool, speaking of that work I spoke of earlier, so wearies him that he does not even know how to go to a city. A proverbial saying really saying that the fool is lost. He doesn't know what he's doing, and so he is lost. This is why it's better to be wise. But moving out of the idea of work and words and going to a spiritual level, the wise man, the righteous, real wise man, knows that they have hope in Jesus. But the fool is lost. No matter how many riches they have, no matter how many things they have, no matter how many horses they ride on, they are lost, and they can't even find their way to the city. And their toil fails them, and their work is never good enough. The fool is lost. This is why, one of the reasons at least, that we cleave to wisdom. Verses 16 through 20, wisdom is prosperous. Wisdom is prosperous. Just maybe not in the way you think. It says here, woe to you, O land, whose king is a lad, and whose princes feast in the morning. Blessed are you, O land, whose kings is of nobility, and whose princes eat at the appropriate time, for strength and not for drunkenness. Now, I wanted to give both of those verses again, but we're going to focus on verse 16 for a moment. What verse 16 is saying is that lad who has a feast in the morning before he works for said feast, woe to him. That one who takes his riches for granted and didn't really work for them. Maybe he inherited those riches. Maybe he stole those riches. It's not clear. But he has these riches and he doesn't value them. So he doesn't maintain them. That would be what you would do during the day. And then you would have your feast in the evening. And you wouldn't drink in the morning and party in the morning. You party at night after working for that party. And it really connects to this earlier thing that we've been talking about work. It is the foolish man doesn't work well, and he doesn't enjoy his work well either because he feasts at the wrong time and doesn't understand that to get riches, you are supposed to work for riches. There's that verse in the New Testament that clearly says, if you do not work, you should not eat. But the foolish man does not understand that, and so he has his party in the morning. Now, why is there woe to him? Well, let's jump to verse 18. We'll come back to verse 17. Through indolence the rafters sag, and through slackness the house leaks. The foolish man's house is literally falling apart. He's spending his money on his feast, and he's not spending it rightly on keeping his house together. And his people are saying this in verse 19. Men prepare a meal for enjoyment, and wine makes life merry, and money is the answer to everything. Now, there's two ways to interpret this verse, and the first interpretation, which I'm going to discuss here, is this idea of that it's this satire, of that the people at the foolish man's feast are saying, let's have enjoyment, let's drink wine, let's make life merry, because money is the answer to everything. And as they're saying this, his house is falling apart. And once again, this is on a temporal level, but taking it to the spiritual, it gets even more serious. Because as the foolish man enjoys life and enjoys his feast and puts his treasures here where his heart is as well, he has no treasures in heaven, and his eternal home is not existent, and he will burn in eternal judgment because he was not wise and he did not fear God. His house falls apart because money is not the answer to everything. This is the foolish man. He is prosperous, but not really. He's prosperous, but not really. It is the wise man who is prosperous. Blessed are you, O land, whose king is of nobility, and whose princes eat at the appropriate time for strength and not for drunkenness. The man who works for his riches, who has his riches, who enjoys his feasts, who does it to the glory of God, who does these things rightly. He is the one who is prosperous, and he's not only prosperous in the things of earth, but in these spiritual blessings that we know are true. And for him, he can have that meal of enjoyment, and wine can make his life merry. And I think verse 19 can also be interpreted as this truth that money, in the world that we live, kind of is the answer to a lot of things. Maybe not to the extent that the foolish man takes it, but money, that gift from God, is the answer to many of our problems, our earthly dilemmas, and so God gives it. However, Solomon understands here that yes, wisdom, in the sense of verse 17, is blessed when it is prosperous. It's usually not. Let me explain. Verse 20 says this, furthermore, in your bedchamber do not curse a king, and in your sleeping rooms do not curse a rich man. Now, why would he have to say that if the wise man was rich? I mean, isn't Solomon rich? Doesn't he know that the wise man has riches? No. How did Solomon get his riches? Were they given to him because he was wise? No. Rather, when God came to him and asked him, what would you like? He said, I would like wisdom. And God said, you have chosen well. And so not only am I going to give you wisdom, but as a blessing from me, I am going to give you riches. See, the wisdom is prosperous, but it's fallen because, yes, if you are able to get riches from your work, good, it is a gift from God. However, it doesn't always work out that way. And in fact, there often are times where the foolish man is the king and the foolish man is the rich man. And the foolish man is the one who has power, who has riches, who's on top of the world, and whose house and his spiritual house is falling apart. This is why the wise man is prosperous, but still in his temporal poverty may he have it, because he has eternal blessings. And in this place we are called to not curse the king and not curse the rich man, because the birds of heaven will carry the sound, and the winged creature will make the matter known. Meaning that because we live in a fallen world, and you say something that's unwise about a king, you insult them or you say something wrong, you could be destroyed by that wise man, by that rich man, because they have power and they can destroy you. Verses 16 through 20 are a very odd passage and really kind of hard to understand, but I think the main point is this, is that there are a lot of times where it is the foolish who are in power. But the wise man should respond to that by knowing that their spiritual houses are falling apart. And rather than cursing them and judging them and hating on them that God would not bless them, the wise man should work harder, know that whatever blessings they are given, may they be small, are a gift from God, and go as far as we learned a couple weeks ago, pray for the foolish rich man. Do not curse them, but rather pray for them, because much prayer do they need. Wisdom is prosperous, but it is fallen. And so we see from this section that wisdom is strong, wisdom is right, wisdom is successful, and wisdom is prosperous. But each of these words are tainted by a fallen world. And that wisdom is forgotten by the world. Wisdom is forsaken by the world. Wisdom is faulty, and wisdom is ultimately fallen. And it leads us to this conclusion, this stress, this confusion. Why should I go after wisdom? Well, wisdom is better than folly, no matter how many times folly seems to often win. Because from an eternal mindset, wisdom always wins. But even more so, why do we keep saying, I want to win? I want to win. I want my wisdom to lead to victory. Because that's not the point of the passage at all, even though it gives that statement in the very beginning of that story of that wise man who gains victory. The wise man was even wiser because he knew he didn't want that throne at all. He didn't want glory for saving that kingdom, because he knew that his victory was an eternal one and a heavenly reality. The fallenness of the world is here to teach us that we should not want to win, but rather to be humble, to show that wisdom is strong, right, successful, and prosperous, but only by the power of Christ's redeeming blood. That he gives the strength, he gives the success, he gives the righteousness, he gives the riches of this world. He is the one who gives them, and we cannot rely on our own wisdom because it falls apart at every single turn. Because in a fallen world, the only way to get out is to have one who has wisdom uncorrupted, and that is Jesus Christ. Turn with me to 1 Corinthians 1, 18 through 31 as we close up here. What a powerful passage I'm about to read. I honestly just read this a few hours ago as I was looking for a good way to conclude this, and I've heard sermons on this passage, and I'm actually going to share one in the comments underneath, and I highly encourage you to listen to that sermon because this is just such a powerful verse in the New Testament about wisdom and what wisdom means to the fool, as well as what wisdom means to the wise man. It says here in verse 18 of 1 Corinthians 1, 1 Corinthians 1:18, for the word of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the cleverness of the clever I will set aside. Where is the wise man? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not come to know God, God was well pleased through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For indeed Jews ask for signs and Greeks search for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, to Jews a stumbling block and to Gentiles foolishness. But to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For consider your calling, brethren, that there were not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong, and the base things of the world and the despised. God has chosen the things that are not, so that he may nullify the things that are, so that no man may boast before God. But by his doing you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, and righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that, just as it is written, let him who boasts boast in the Lord. The reason that wisdom fails at every turn is because the wisdom of the Christian realizes he is a fool. Because the wisdom that wants to win is the wisdom of the world, and that is foolishness. God's story is for us to cleave to wisdom, knowing that it is not our wisdom, but God's wisdom. It is not our will be done, but his will be done. May we glory in this reality that we do not need our wisdom to win the day, but rather let us rejoice in the gifts of wisdom, that wisdom is strong, wisdom is right, wisdom is successful, and wisdom is prosperous, even in a fallen world. I highly encourage you to dwell more on 1 Corinthians 1:18 through 31, such a rich passage contrasting wisdom and foolishness with a focused gaze on Jesus. And I hope that if you ever read Proverbs, you have an enhanced look at it. Not saying that Proverbs is wrong in any way, but rather to have this better understanding of what Proverbs is all about. That the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And spoiler alert, after Ecclesiastes, we will be studying Proverbs chapters 1 through 9. So we'll see more of this in June. I'm really excited to be going through Proverbs over the summer. Thank you so much for listening to this message, and I will see you all next week.